Hello and welcome back to my channel. I look at feminism as a failed social experiment, and I've made videos that address issues surrounding feminism. But in the past, I used to be the biggest feminist you could ever meet. Recently, I was asked what it took for me to go from being such an advocate for feminism to loudly renouncing feminism today. People are curious to know what took place. What was my journey? There was a process involved that required me to get to a point where I questioned my own beliefs. During this process, I learned from reality. I started noticing the impact feminism was having on individual people. Unfortunately, this took several years and a lot of mistakes in order for me to finally come to terms with the lessons life taught me. With that being said, I'm glad that I'm no longer under the delusions of feminism, and I'll be able to pass on what I've learned about it to my daughter, and hopefully to my audience as well. In order for me to break down the core doctrine of feminism, I'll have to expose the lies one by one. This will be part of a series on dismantling the lies of feminism. I need to be clear. I do not condone any form of misogyny. Being critical of or even against feminism does not make someone a misogynist. If you believe that this is true, look up the term false dichotomy and you'll see that this is a logical fallacy. I also don't want to demonize feminists or say that they're bad people. Women and men who identify as feminists have absorbed what their society tells them is true. And you can't punish someone for conforming to their own society, no more than you can blame a 4-year-old who was born in the United States for speaking English. People, especially children, integrate what's around them without even trying to. I think most feminists believe in fairness and justice, but they've been misguided by pop culture, social media, and circles of university intellectuals. For me, feminism didn't originate from hatred of men, but from envy of them. I was a tomboy when I was a kid. I didn't like wearing dresses, and I wasn't interested in makeup. I liked to play outside, explore the woods, collect rocks, and I liked to read. I was unafraid of getting dirty. I mostly played with a male cousin of mine who was the same age as me, and I remember feeling like his behavior gained the approval of my family members, but mine didn't. In fact, I felt like my family in general preferred boys. When puberty was explained to me as a child, it made me feel ill. The idea of my body going through a transformation that rendered me a woman didn't sound too appealing. I remember watching the women out in public with their perfect hair and makeup and looking so dolled up and attractive, and I remember thinking that I'm supposed to turn into that, but I didn't think I could ever be that pretty. And I hated the idea of receiving attention from men because as a child, it sounded disgusting and wrong. I associated femininity with stupidity, crying, complaining, shopping, and fragility. My mother and sisters were big believers in feminism. Even though I was separated from them as a child and was raised by my father for the majority of my childhood, I still interacted with them enough to absorb the indoctrination. In high school, during my years of self-searching, I embraced feminism fully, and I thought my beliefs would never change. I've always been a person who takes my beliefs very seriously, and I've always been determined to have the integrity to live according to those beliefs. When I started receiving attention from boys, I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know how to respond to it. I had crushes on boys, but I was always too shy to talk to them about it. I consider myself to be a late bloomer. I think feminism appeals to women who are intelligent, and this is one reason why it is so insidious. As a child, I remember thinking that I was just as smart, if not smarter, than the boys I interacted with, and this made me confused. I absorbed a message that I later identified as men are the standard, and that women are derivatives of men. When you think of a human, you think of a man, not a woman, because women are incomplete human beings. This made me feel defiant and more committed to my feminist beliefs. I genuinely felt that inside, I was no different from a boy. I also felt like the core of who I was separate from my body. I believed that the only difference between men and women was what was between their legs, and I resented the idea that I would be judged by my looks just because I was born a girl. Even as a child, I understood that good looks were superficial and temporary, so I didn't see the point in putting too much stock into it. I believed I had much more to offer the world using my mind. I was taught to have disdain for men. I was taught that they were inherently malevolent and wanted to treat all women as baby-making machines. I think the reason feminism appealed to me so much as a teenager is because I was thirsting for an identity. According to Erikson's stages of development, the goal of adolescence is to form an identity, and I felt that feminism gave me that identity. I felt like I alone knew about this grand conspiracy and that most people couldn't access the information I knew, and this made me feel superior. However, the reality is that I wasn't good at discerning the truth in the first place. I wasn't thinking critically. I was just subscribing to an ideology that I thought made me unique. In other words, being a feminist made me feel good. It made me feel like I was a righteous person. As I got older and gained a lot more experience, I slowly obtained the ability to determine the truth for myself. One by one, all the tenets of feminism disintegrated into falsehoods, and at some point I realized that my brain had been hijacked. I felt betrayed because I had given my faith to feminism, only to realize that it had led me to make terrible choices that I would later regret. Feminism began to negatively affect my life in a major way when I got married. Soon after marrying my husband, I became a mother, and then 8 months later, I started working full-time as a nurse. It became clear in the first 2 years of my marriage that I had no idea how to be a wife, but I was too arrogant to believe that it was my fault. The first 2 years of my marriage were very difficult. I went to marriage counseling with my husband for several months, but things didn't get any better. In fact, they only got worse. My husband and I began having long, drawn-out fights that were sometimes very intense. Most of our fights had to do with my husband not following my orders. I was stubborn, and I had a strong will. I believed that it was my duty to lead him in the relationship. I believed that it was my job to hold him accountable for his actions and to punish him in some way whenever he disobeyed my wishes. I was always leading the attack, trying to get him on the defensive. I would nag him in an effort to get him to relent out of sheer annoyance. All of these things made my husband feel emasculated, but I didn't understand that at the time. I saw members of his family as my enemies, and I told him that he had to choose me over them. I didn't think this was an unreasonable request, but he felt like he couldn't make that choice and that he shouldn't have to. Because I worked full-time, I thought it was unjustified for me to be expected to do the duties of a housewife. I had no concept of gender roles because I didn't have a lot of memories of my parents working together as a married couple. My resentment for my husband was partially fueled by a mental illness that I didn't know I had, which caused me to see him as my enemy and another source of male oppression. Over time, my husband and I became more and more estranged until we eventually separated. In 2020, I was diagnosed with a severe case of bipolar disorder, and I reunited with my husband, but I still didn't know how to be a good wife. It took 3 years for the doctors to finally prescribe me an effective combination of medications, and then the fog was lifted from my mind, and I achieved an acute sense of clarity. Once my mental illness was properly addressed, I could do something to fix my marriage. I discovered a book called Worthy Woman, written by a man named Roedde. Roedde is a relationship coach who has written several books on how both men and women can change their behavior in order to mend and form lasting, committed relationships. The content of his books may be considered controversial because it defies the feminist ideology that we've been indoctrinated into following. The word submissive is frequently used in Worthy Woman and has the potential to trigger feminists. At the time I read the book, I was already partially disillusioned with feminism, and I was open to new ideas. I knew I wanted to save my marriage. My husband and I both read the book, and together we decided to give his methods a try. Without going into too much detail about the book, it basically educates people about traditional gender roles. I would highly recommend this book to anyone who is having difficulty in their relationship. It discusses how women in our society have a tendency towards masculine behaviors that serve to emasculate the men in their lives, which lessens the men's devotion towards those women. Submission is a tool that women can use to empower their men to effectively take leadership in a way that meets their needs. Submission is not synonymous with servitude, as I had previously thought. The book teaches women how to express themselves in feminine ways, such that the men they are with will be motivated to make them happy. Obviously, this technique will not work in all cases, but it did work for my husband and me. Relationships are a delicate balance of masculine and feminine polar energies that coincide to enhance the quality of both people's lives. It requires maturity and humility on the part of the woman to respectfully defer to the judgment of her man, as long as that man does not abuse her. After a few months of embracing traditional gender roles, practicing submission, and showing my husband the respect he deserved, I came to the realization that we were finally happy. A year and a half ago, we were on the verge of divorce, but now, since embracing my feminine nature, we have had 0 arguments. The conflict has completely disappeared and has been replaced by loving reciprocity. I came to find that being the leader doesn't make me happy. I don't like ordering people around, nor do I like the responsibility of making all major decisions. The solution has always been elegantly simple and within my grasp, and now it feels like we are newlyweds. I take my role as a wife and mother very seriously, and I can't describe how rewarding that has been for me. However, it's important to acknowledge the economic reality of most people, which is that their households require dual incomes to pay the bills and keep a roof over their head. God has blessed me with a situation in which I can actually be a stay-at-home mother and devote my attention towards my family. But this isn't a possibility for many women. I don't know how to fix that. But I do know that feminism has led to dual-income households being the standard for most people because it caused women to flood the workforce in equal numbers as men. This has resulted in women being in a situation where they simply can't spend their time and their lives raising their own children because they're socially required to pursue careers. My enlightenment from feminism was painful because I felt and still feel like I was deceived. I came to the realization that feminism had infiltrated every corner of my mind and had influenced my values. I had believed in things that were actually lies. This caused me to realize that I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. I consider myself to be a person who thinks deeply about society and all the implications of our current culture, and I feel obligated to reveal the truth about feminist ideology because I think it's the root cause of many serious issues that we are all currently dealing with. I also believe that if I had known years ago what I know now, I would have made better decisions. The knowledge I've learned has come from the suffering I've accumulated from repeated failure, and I want to pass on this information that I now have so that it might help someone else who's engrossed in this false belief system to avoid making the same mistakes I did. Feminism has always promoted itself as being a movement that exists for the benefit and advancement of women. Some people consider it to be a movement towards equality of the sexes. Some people consider it to be a movement that wants to place women in a privileged position in relation to men. Whatever the case may be, the consequences of this social experiment have revealed that it does not benefit women. In fact, it actively works against the interests of women in several ways. Over the course of a series of videos, I will explain how this is true. For now, thank you for watching, and please check out my next video on the topic of feminism.